presenting the most iconic symbol of Cobra's land power. It's the 1983 Hi Speed Sentry, the HiSS. And here are your hosts, Steve, Paul, and Rob. Yes, it is us. We are back. It's time for another toy-focused, long-form review, discussion, analysis, information dumps. It's all happening on GI Joburg, episode 344. Why is it taking us this long to talk about the HiSS, boys?
Not all of us owned it. I only received mine last year from Tim Wild. I still haven't opened it because Steven has one and I like that, keeping mine fresh so I don't break mine.
You know what, guys? I think one of the main reasons we haven't spoken about this is because we feel that we have spoken about this. The HiSS tank has been quite a common feature in our podcast episodes, whether it be head-on battles, art discussions, things like the retro HiSS, getting excited about that, and then talking about the old HiSS. So I think it's just that it's a vehicle that we've always had on our lips,
in our
and that
minds.
maybe we felt that it wasn't like it wasn't the first thing we thought of when we decided to do these shows, because we were thinking about other things. I think we all thought we had done the HiSS. Maybe that's my reasoning.
Of course, we talked about it.
Yep. Well, I got my first HiSS. Gosh, I think it was in my 20s. I was in Joburg, and I was in a comic book shop, and the guy.
Oh God, yes. Just
hanging out. Like, there's nothing really that I have a burning desire to buy at a comic book shop. I'm not a comic book collector. The guy was like, "Hey, Butts, can I help you with anything?" And I was like, just on the off chance. Do you have any GI Joe? He's like, well, as a matter of fact, I do. Went into the back, pulled out a box. There were 2 Cobra claws. There was a HiSS tank. There were instructions for a Takara Japanese release Rattler and a few Rattler bombs. Someone got luckier than me that day, or the day prior to that. And the HiSS tank had the commonality and an asp. Yes, of course. And a Dusty, I think. Anyway, it was just a loose sort of, clearly someone's collection that was being sold off piece by piece. The Rattler had already gone, and these were the scraps. And the guy let me have it for a paltry sum. Happy days. 200 Rand, walk out with some toys. That's about $15. Ridiculous. The turret had the common malady of the broken pins, so it didn't ratchet correctly. But Deadly Pencils hooked me up, man. What did you use? Styrene? You reconstructed the entire console. That's what it was. Yes, it had a missing sort of locking piece. I think it's an underside to the turret mount that locks the cannon tips in place. You built the whole thing and even put in a custom screen.
Yes, I did shot, actually. I used styrene and epoxy pipe.
Shot is a good thing in South African parlance. It means
it's a good thing. Yeah, as people are learning when they speak to me, and they're like, "What does shot mean?"
But yeah, what an outstanding toy to bring back to life. And first blushings with it, like, it's absurd to me, boys, that the first exposure we had to this mold was this orange monstrosity called Septic Tank. Oh, Eco Warriors' first vehicle, or the bad Eco Warriors, whatever you want to call the Cobra faction. So this is how it was introduced to me. So imagine my surprise when flipping through an issue of GI Joe. It was Tales of GI Joe, so the reprints, the 1988 series, and I see a comic book commercial for the mail order toys, and among them, the HiSS tank. Or the HiSS.
Oh, they repainted the septic tank? Cool.
I lost my mind when I saw this ad because I was like, I recognize that mold, but it's in black. It looks good. I immediately took a Sharpie or a Koki pen and colored in my septic tank.
The septic tank.
So my original septic tank. Was it really, Rob?
It generally, for the first couple of years, it was, until the paint started to fade. And I don't think it faded. It's more like it started to peel off.
Yeah, rub off.
Nothing peels off when it's a Sharpie, a permanent marker. Like I've now revived that thing sort of by scrubbing the pen away, actually scouring it like
With
taking off
rubbing
the
alcohol, I hope.
No, with,
No.
like, something
Why?
else.
That would work. No,
I don't
rubbing
know.
alcohol will take it off easy. Isopropyl.
No, but now it's got cool, like weathered look to it. Stephen weathered
The
his septic
undercarriage
tank.
looks really oily and black, and all the hard to reach places are still
So
penned
basically, you've done like an inverse wash.
You weathered it
Cool.
the long way around.
So I just because we have to have it here locked in for posterity's sake. It was so irritating that Steve found that bunch of GI Joe stuff on my turf
You'll never get
in
over
a comic store that I frequent, and
luck of the
I just
draw.
want to put that out there.
Just happened to be in town that week, and I dropped by.
He asked
hey,
the
That's
right
the devil's
questions.
luck, ladies and gentlemen.
So in
But
South
yeah.
Africa, our exposure to the notion of a hiss was through the Hiss 2.
Yes, that was my exposure to it.
Certainly, yeah, and it looked cool. I saw one once upon a time at a toy store in Access Park, a kind of like a industrial outlet shop, factory shop kind of park. And never again. I didn't buy it. I bought the Warthog instead. But the catalog image always had my interest because it looked like the back was coming off. I couldn't tell if it was a shadow or if it was actually a flip down ramp. The photograph was too small to make out that detail. But yes, lo and behold, the Hiss 2 was an APC / armored vehicle / I don't know, it's assault vehicle, and a far more substantial thing. So I must say my first exposure to the first Hiss, was a little underwhelming. I was like, huh? This thing's kind of piddly.
It's kind of dinky, you know.
Yeah,
It's got a
But
glass
it's
canopy.
It's by design. It was, I believe, a very inexpensive vehicle back in 1983. The
I'm
theory
sure it was.
behind that being, I mean, it wasn't exactly Cobra's answer to the Mobat. It was far cheaper and far less complex. But that was the thinking at the time, that baddie vehicles or baddie toys didn't sell as well, so make fewer of them and make them more cheaply.
Yeah, it feels multi-purpose. I mean, with Hi Speed Sentry, you know, like it gets to where it needs to go. It takes out, you know, the enemy stuff and it zooms away. Very unique looking design. Like I was looking through tank designs in preparation for the show, and because of the way that tank history or the way the tank technology has developed, these days there's one type of tank. It's the MBT, the main battle tank. Which is, I suppose, characterized by the M1 Abrams. Essentially, all tanks in the entire world look like that. And the philosophy behind tank technology essentially is a balance of firepower, protection, and battlefield mobility. So you're trying to balance, you know, the protection of the crew versus how strong your firepower is, and how easy it is to not only move around on a battlefield, you know, on roads and off-road, as well as how easy it is to get it to wherever it will be operating, wherever it will be used. And the form factor of the MBT is essentially, it's the perfect way, you know, to make a tank these days. Well, back in the day, there were multi-purpose, you know, there were many different types of tanks, you know, fire, you know, so it's like fire tanks and like rocket launching tanks. But these days, literally the MBT is the type of tank that has taken off since, I suppose, World War II, essentially.
Natural selection, basically. There's something very Darwinian about where we find ourselves.
You know,
in
and
tank
you kind of,
technology.
it's whatever is most efficient, you know, and this is the form factor we have today is essentially the best form for a tank to have.
Now,
And
the
if you
limiting factor here is reality. Sure.
Yes.
I'd like to just bring in, I mean, here at GI Joburg, we like using real facts and actual stats because it helps our understanding of how these things work in a sort of fantastical play environment. But if you branch out from reality ever so slightly, there's a game called World of Tanks, which is it's like first-person shooter but with a tank, or third-person shooter. You know,
very comprehensive and very, I don't know if it's terribly, apparently it's very realistic. But I mean, it's very involved.
It has a Mobat and a Hiss in it, is where I'm going with this. And so they've had to invent stats for fantastical tanks. The Mobat looks like a tank, it's a tank. The HiSS is classed as a light tank for the purposes of that game, and they've statted it in such a way that it makes it quite formidable.
Like a DeLorean in the front.
Oh, yeah,
Sorry.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, we've spoken on this podcast before about the fact that the HiSS looks like a sports car on tracks. Mauler Joe came on the show and spoke about the HiSS tank, part lovingly, part scathingly, just saying like a sculptor took a block of clay, like the size of a shoebox maybe, and cut out shapes that left him with this HiSS tank or HiSS shape. And it was an attractive shape, but absolutely not a practical one. I mean, just think about how many times the front end of the HiSS would like ditch itself. I mean, if it tries to fjord a trench or something, it's going to dig in. But I love the way they've presented it in this world of tanks. They've armored it up. It has the same vibe as the HasLab classified scale HiSS. In that, they've gotten in and really worked in the details. It feels heavier. It feels more armored. They've not stuck a gunner in the turret, and the front glass section looks more armored up.
I think
it still will not take a shot from another tank.
Absolutely not. The protection that you're affording your crew is very low with this design. But what I really like about the way that they've redesigned it from the pictures you're showing is that they've changed the shape ever so slightly, just enough of the tracks.
Oh.
Whereas with the actual HiSS, it's very obviously like a big triangle. Well, here they've kind of like pared it down a lot, and it actually makes it look a lot better. Which I quite like, because like if you look at the HiSS, I mean, it looks nothing like what we think of as a tank. I think it probably has more in common with like construction vehicles. They kind of have those much bigger tracks that they use. Because construction vehicles are some sort of agricultural vehicle. Like it's very much not a realistic tank that you would see driving around the world these days, but it's still very alluring and very unique.
I think that's the thing. Like you kind of hit the nail on the head there. I think the HiSS tank, we only call it a HiSS. We only refer to it as a tank because it's been called a HiSS tank. But there's very little about it that says it's a tank other than it having treads. But then construction vehicles have treads as well.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's like, but with the World of Tanks version, although I do appreciate it, and I actually would like to point out that I like the fact that the design, even though they try to make it more believable, they still kept a lot of the goofiness of the HiSS intact. They didn't try to overcool it, and I respect that. And I think that was a nice touch, and it just that's a nod to the designers in this game. But Steve, you mentioned earlier, like this thing's inspired. Well, you feel that the HasLab HiSS borrows some cues from this, and looking at it again, I'm like, oh yeah, somebody played some World of Tanks.
And why wouldn't you? It gives you.
Yeah.
It is exhilarating watching like gameplay footage, because I'm like, yeah, that's how I used to play with tanks. Like just zooming around the landscape, shooting other tanks, like just this absolute mania of tank warfare, which probably hasn't been seen. It's probably something that you might have seen. Well, no, I'm thinking more the Gulf War, the land battle.
Oh, geez, because of the Abrams being introduced.
Abrams and all the sort of Soviet hardware that Iraq was fielding. You're probably seeing a fair bit of that in the Ukraine at the moment. Russian tanks versus Ukrainian tanks, which are all ultimately
American
Russian tanks.
Oh.
And a few international armored vehicles thrown in there as well. It's just what an interesting way to kind of usher the HiSS into tankdom. By increasing our understanding of how this thing would work. Using like a gamer's philosophy. And I think that's valid. I think it's valid when you're talking about something as fantastical as the HiSS, to try and apply real world metrics to it is going to be an exercise in not futility, but you're just going to annoy yourself. You're going to wind up shrinking this thing's role to being basically like a hit and run vehicle, whereas actually this is Cobra's backbone armored vehicle. Hasn't had a successor apart from like maybe the Crimson attack tank and the Canadian Shard. Like the yeah, you know what I said. Like those are not commonly had tanks. The HiSS is everywhere. It's ubiquitous. Every Cobra armored column is a HiSS column.
So earlier, we spoke about the first our initial introductions to the HiSS when we first saw it, when we first encountered it. Mine is kind of an oddball one, because the first time I actually saw a HiSS tank was the miniatures, because that they did those pack-in miniatures at one point, and that was in a catalog, and that catalog came with, I think it was a Locust or something that David's Locust. I think it was. Anyway,
there's no ways a South African release would have that catalog.
No, it was an international catalog, and it was the miniature, and I was like, that little thing is fascinating. Like, I really love the shape of it. Like, it just looks cool. And I was like, what even is that? And that's also, I think, the first time I saw a snowcat, to be fair, as well. And then not too long after that, I watched the cartoon, and in the cartoon, they featured some HiSS tanks, and I was like, okay. And then the actual first HiSS tank I ever touched was a HiSS 2, as you mentioned, because that's something that most of us in South Africa had. But I do want to add this tiny little anecdote. Guys, I don't understand my brain.
We're supposed to?
We don't either.
Right, exactly right. I can see certain details, and I can, like, what's the word? The code, maybe deduce, and I can do all that kind of stuff. And with reasonable success, at least in my youth, I could. And that's actually, I think, how I appreciated anime and stuff like that. But the septic tank, for the longest time, I did not realize that the septic tank was a HiSS tank.
You didn't.
No,
guys,
way.
it is the most ridiculous thing. I remember, like, I don't know, I think the penny dropped when I got Mark Bellomo's book, and I looked at it and I was like,
Wait a minute.
wait. Yeah, I'm that lame. Because remember, I've never seen I never saw a septic tank in the flesh until I saw yours, Steve, at your place.
Which is always going to be curious to
then-
me, because they were peg warmers. Well, it was a box, so I can't really warm a peg. Shelf warmers at Reggie's. Like, septic tanks were.
Yeah, but the artwork is like this. Hold on, let me try it. The artwork is kind of like, it's like kind of this, right? With like
No,
the
septic
shape is
tank.
very different.
Septic
it doesn't-
tank is side on, just like the HiSS.
I think
Okay,
it just
well then, I
confuses
don't know,
you
it
because
just-
it doesn't have a glass canopy, and also the colors can be very deceptive as well.
Yeah,
Like,
it just
change the shape in
dazzled
your
me, bro.
brain.
I would have legit.
Well, now we've
if
had an
I-
insight into how your brain works, Paul. But you
Or
spoke
doesn't
about
work
appearances. I think the first historical appearance of the HiSS in media
Never.
was actually in the comic books. Issue 11.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, that one. That was the cool issue too.
Well, the comic book, more than anything else, shows us the capabilities of a HiSS. Because this is Cobra's like Arctic workhorse in the issue. It's the pipeline ploy, so it's got a snowbound setting. It's got an introduction of a whole bunch of new Joes and Cobra weapons, and the HiSS is one of them. And it's going to be used by Cobra for snow warfare out in the Alaskan pipeline.
Which is brilliant. I mean, it is a
awesome.
tracked vehicle, and
Yep.
most snowmobiles and vehicles are tracked, so it makes sense for them to even use it there.
Oh, yeah. Yep. And it absolutely sees a lot of use in that issue on both sides of the fence. Cobra's obviously operating them, but GI Joe, they commandeer one that has been kind of just left on the battlefield, knocked over. No, not even knocked over. They just find one that's ready to go.
Sawmer.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And,
its turret has been knocked out. That's what it was.
I don't know. We're not going to go through all of the HiSS like greatest hits, but there was a great issue also in the earlier issues of GI Joe, where basically a Cobra is basically storming the capital kind of vibe, and there's a whole thing. And geez, it is the comic book, yeah. And torpedoes even in that issue, if I'm not mistaken. And there's
Issue
a whole
16, perhaps.
yes.
Night Attack. It's actually on the cover.
Yeah. There we go. And that was I remember that being very cool because that was also when for me
it's
at
notable
least,
for a couple of reasons. No, but carry on, Paul. Yeah.
No, that was the thing for me, yeah, but I just felt that in this issue we really got to understand the villains a bit more. Like they weren't just like this villain doing this thing. We started seeing we started being introduced to their personalities. At least this is when that started happening for me. And it was a cool moment.
And the HiSS tank developed a personality too.
It absolutely did, and we see flavorings of its pre-production concept. The fact that it had this kind of main sort of spar that ran along the canopy.
We did see that in the previous issue as well.
Yeah.
And they didn't even have a canopy. Like here's where it actually seems to have the canopy.
Well, it seems like the
Sometimes.
drivers can poke their heads through on either side of this kind of, what are we going to call it? It's like a Firebird, like a Pontiac. It's just got this kind of like roof section running down the middle and then glass on either side. What I wanted to point out was the fact that it has the prototype illustrations like drop-down jaw, which allows for the occupant to get in or out. Love that.
Yeah,
That is
one of my
very
favorite
cool.
things about the HiSS 2 actually, just as a toy.
Oh no, fantastic! But I mean, obviously, these were things that they wanted to include when they developed the prototype images of the HiSS, but it just didn't work out at the time.
Well, they wanted to keep the costs low. They eventually got their
I think
chance
that's
with the
exactly.
HiSS 2.
Yeah, I was
What
going to say, I
also
think that's the
about
only
Night
reason.
Attack is, sure. I mean, if they were playing with the same kind of budget the Mobat had, things
They
would be
could have gone
different.
crazy.
But the HiSS is a perfect army builder as a result. Like the only issue are the cannon pins, and you've managed to fix mine, so that's not an insurmountable mountain. But I just also wanted to point out the fact that the HiSS tank one-ups the Mobat in that it's just so playable.
It's
you
not
can
bad
fit
to operate it.
two occupants as opposed to one and fit them properly. Like the gunner in the HiSS cupola goes far deeper than the Mobat occupant, who looks like he's just the wrong scale for the tank altogether. But Night Attack, issue 16, showcases another fun play area of the HiSS, the back sill, as a troop transport section. Larry saw fit to stage an action sequence on that sill, on the back of a moving HiSS tank. Hawk and Cobra Commander and Destro are all kind of just what's the term? Hashing it out. They're all having a
Barney.
Go at each other.
combustification. Yeah, exactly. Classic.
Or do we like to call it here in South Africa a Barney?
Yeah.
They're
And
having
Clutch
a
remarks
forceful
that,
altercation.
Clutch remarks that the HiSS tank is so fast that it looks like it popped a wheelie. Like, we're getting a lot of information about the HiSS in this issue, which is all appreciated by yours truly. I love every little nugget you can get about a vehicle toy, especially.
This little vehicle is something that's special because it has a lot more charm than it has sense. And I think
It's true.
that is why it's endured. I can think of much more technically better vehicles than this that don't have its charm, that haven't endured as well. But the HiSS this is something that we just keep getting. It's just been HasLabbed. Guys have actually got theirs now, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, yeah.
And it's endured, and it's just so iconic.
Yeah, the design is so simple, and it's so easy to draw. Like you just start drawing those shapes,
Or
and
is
you
it, Paul?
instantly know what it is.
It is. Let's put it this way: you can take a lot of liberties with the HiSS tank, and it still looks like a HiSS tank, which is
Yeah,
cool.
because it looks like nothing else in existence. Talking about nuggets of information that you get in the issues.
Love that
issue
cover
30,
of. Thank you, issue 30. That's the issue.
Dreadnoks taking a Sky Striker apart. The issue is called Darkness, and the reason I raise it is because on the file card of the HiSS tank or the HiSS driver, it specifies that he has a vehicle specification not only that extends to the HiSS, obviously, but to the Fang helicopter as well. And what's interesting about this issue is we see HiSS tanks, I'm going to keep doing that. We see HiSSes being rolled out of Arbco Brothers Circus trucks, but we also see Fang helicopters. And we see, for the first time in comic book print media, the driver figures. But they're not being put into the HiSS. They're being put into the Fangs.
Brilliant. That's like the only thing that someone remembered about the red driver is that he could drive a Fang.
Well,
not that he was actually the HiSS driver.
Since the Fang doesn't come with a designated pilot, and since I'm always going to think that a helicopter is complex enough to require a dedicated pilot, even if it's a small helicopter like a Fang. Maybe
someone with knowledge.
Yeah. So having a designated uniform for it, like the HiSS driver's uniform, makes a lot of sense. Not only that, it looks damn good in the seat.
Ooh, Stephen is showing us his Fang, driven by a HiSS driver.
I will always default to putting HiSS drivers in Fangs because the color offset is so nice. It's the same red as the missiles, the roll bar, and the gun. And it's good,
and it's an attractive figure, man. The HiSS driver is an attractive vintage figure, gotta say. Never really
one of the few good-looking vintage figures.
I think he's a weird one with those thigh-high boots.
But he's cool looking, man.
It's very camp.
You want to be able to take him out of the HiSS. Like he's one of those drivers that you wouldn't mind putting on display in your Fang.
I always feel
disagree. I think he makes the most sense on a vehicle. Like I wouldn't say put him on display in like a figure display.
That's why I said that's what I was going to say. You could see him better in the Fang.
The modern era version of him, for example, and this retro version of him, I never felt translated well. They always felt generic and too like sort of cobbled together with other parts for them to have any like real identity. But the vintage one has got something very classy. And guys, I feel like I should mention this. Cujo is a huge fan of that design as well. So yeah, he loves himself a HiSS driver. Which
cheers, brother.
Yeah.
Shall we talk a little bit more about its comic book appearances? I mean, I'm only picking out appearances that give us like intel on the HiSS itself.
And intel that we can find
it's going deep.
Contradicts itself later on in all the different medias that they've given stats for this thing.
I'm surprised this thing hasn't gone to space yet. That's what I'm saying.
It would be cool. Luna.
Wow, issue 196 of GI Joe.
Don't troll. Okay, issue 37, Twin Brothers. We've got a training sequence, where the GI Joes are driving captured HiSSes. And it's Roadblock and Lady J. They're each in the gunner's turrets. However, Roadblock remarks that you can use your feet to manipulate the tracks. He says the right foot controls the right track, the left foot controls the left track. That frees both hands to operate the weapon systems. And Lady J is having trouble with that amount of coordination. And
that's like a plane. Like a plane's your system, I think.
Well,
doesn't the yaw work like that?
It's got similarities to you would still coordinate your controls with the joystick,
with the yoke. Yeah,
but a helicopter certainly.
That's
you're
wild.
you're coordinating your right hand, left hand, and both feet.
So it's the gunner who drives it. This is why his driver can be freed up to fly the Fang, because he doesn't actually have to drive the HiSS. Brilliant.
You can operate a HiSS all on your own. Amazing. And even fire the gun. I'm not just talking about getting behind the wheel. Like you are getting behind the sticks.
One-man tank.
The differential.
I wonder who gets control preference. Like if the gunner thinks that the driver is drunk, I wonder if he can like override it.
Lock him out.
Yeah. I wonder what the safety feature is there. Because in my mind, what makes sense is that if the gunner can drive the HiSS, then maybe there's a speed limitation. Like they can only let the hiss go so fast.
Or maybe this is just a hack that GI Joe engineers put in for training purposes, so they don't tie up too many important personnel. I don't know. It's interesting to me, but look, like if it exists in canon, you can play it in your own playtime. Like you can put one guy in the turret and off you go.
So cool.
Run and gun.
I love
this issue is also notable for the fact that it used the HiSS drivers, but as stand-ins for the Crimson Guard. I might be wrong about this, but my theory anyway, because the Crimson Guard figures were around by this stage, but maybe the artist had the wrong figure to hand. Like maybe Larry phoned him up and said, "Oh, it's the red figure in the box." So the artist rifled around in the toy box and found a red figure with a Cobra symbol on his chest, and it was like, "Yeah, that's the one."
It's them knee-high boots, man.
But it was actually the driver and not the Crimson Guard.
That is a great.
What issue is this again? Which issue number?
37. Twin Brothers.
37. Guys, listeners, specifically listeners, please check out 37, especially for the Into the Dragon homage there with the mirror room.
All of mirrors. Well, they are at a circus. It's one of those tropes that you're always going to come back to. And how can anyone forget? Probably the HiSS's most memorable inclusion on the cover of an issue was in the Cobra Island Civil War, issue 75, where you have Baroness strapped to the hood of Serpentor's lead HiSS.
Now that's memorable.
You know it.
Yikes.
In the Cobra Island Civil War, Serpentor's forces used all the older GI Joe or Cobra equipment. They used rattlers and HiSS tanks when Cobra Commander or Fred and Mindbender's forces used maggots and mumbers. Now, it's curious to me that they made the maggot the opposite number to the HiSS. I guess there wasn't anything else available in the toy line at the time, but maggots are artillery pieces. HiSSes are for, I suppose, more up close and personal.
Anti-armor, anti-infantry.
Yeah, they do hang a lantern on that from time to time, and I just thought it was interesting that these are being equated with one another. Like, Zartan was with Serpentor's forces at the time, and he sort of remarks that, like, the maggots outrange us. We have to get a lot closer. They can just keep picking us off while we close the distance. So we do better to do a sort of a more hit-and-run campaign and fall back from this particular engagement. So, once again, lovely getting insight.
Yeah, it creates different strategies.
Mega Force.
You know, that the different sides had to use depending on the technology that they had.
Of necessity. But I mean, we've spoken about it before, like the Rattler of Serpentor's forces was absolutely wiping the skies, free of the sort of Mamba resistance that they were encountering.
Jets versus helicopters. Jets gonna win
Anytime. Sorry.
every time.
I don't
In
care if it's
September of
Airwolf or what.
1983, we saw animated HiSS tanks.
Oh my god.
Yay.
They get teleported by the mass device into GI Joe's Relay Star Station, like the launch base,
Yay.
which is amazing.
Check those fat techies, eh? Yo. And I mean the trade.
First,
in the shot.
his first encounter with GI Joe to be happening inside of doors. That's interesting. In true baddie fashion, however, like GI Joe's armed with rifles and pistols, and they open fire, and his tanks just like spontaneously combust. They don't even have any heavy artillery or anything, but like,
My goodness, it's
such an animation.
the HiSSes are failing on the protection front heavily. Like the glass canopy, they get destroyed by single laser shots. It's definitely not a tank.
Duke is depicted holding like what looks a lot like a Colt 1911. So like a 45 caliber bullet is enough to shred this tank into a fireball. Duke is this run of luck. He escapes from Cobra in a glider. He comes unstuck, hitting a
just
tree
like
branch. This is true. But he's got the luck of the Irish. He falls right into the cab of a parked HiSS. which has its top down. Like, you can ride this thing convertible style.
If only he knew
what's the
he
difference?
he could have dropped into
Yeah.
the gunner position as well, but he didn't read the comics.
I mean, to be fair, guys, like, whether the canopy is up or down, I suppose the only difference is, do you want protein on your HiSS drive or no protein? Because you're vulnerable either way.
Oh, yeah. I don't know if any bugs are going to get through Duke's gritted teeth. I mean, he's blasting through at high speed. The pursuing
Man's got a
enemy
shit there, dude.
tanks are depicted like fjording water. They've got prototype water moccasins animated, sort of going through the swamps, and the hisses are like keeping pace with the moccasin.
Wow.
Over water. Duke is able to catch air in his tank. He's going so fast that he launches the hiss.
He jumps the shark.
Yeah, big time. And he gets a pretty decent hang time, dudes. Before
I suppose
having a ski end in a mangrove tree.
that is one feature of the weird design of the hiss. It elevated the height of the vehicle, is that you could probably do that. I mean, not the jumping, but it could actually ford rivers with a fair amount of ease and actually still keep the majority of the vehicle dry.
If you consider that the front hull like looks like a boat hull, like it probably does cut the water
Just angled,
fairly well.
It could do a very good job. It could probably ford a river much better than like an average tank could.
Life finds a way.
We spoke a bit about the hardiness of the hiss. Maybe just to kind of give you an impression of how it handles in combat in the comic book. I mean, obviously the cartoon, vehicles tend to just spontaneously combust as and when the plot requires them to. When there's a big battle, everything just turns into fireballs. But in Yearbook 4 from 1988, in the issue entitled Trade-Offs, we see the two Navy SEAL GI Joes, Wetsuit and Torpedo, team up with the October Guard when they're facing a column of Cobra armor, hisses, maggots, and they turn on them with small arms, like machine guns, grenade launchers, and rocket-propelled grenades, and make mincemeat of Cobra's armor. Absolutely massacre all the supposed tanks. So Larry was not afraid to lean into Cobra vehicles' fragility or frailty. Like, they are absolutely just death traps, even for ground troops who are exposed with no cover. And yet they are, like, in one panel, Horror Show is shooting through the glass of the HiSS tank with a machine gun, sure, but like at close range, he's able to penetrate the glass and make the driver either duck or outright be killed. And he's completely rattled the turret.
What would you say his machine gun is there, by the way? Do you think it's an AK, like a drum-fed AK?
That is probably the Russian. Is it an RPD?
Kalashnikov. Oh.
No, it's a bigger gun. It's drum-fed in this panel, but it's obviously a belt-fed gun as well. I've actually had the pleasure of firing one of these with an armorer in Cape Town. They're bloody loud and lot of fire, a lot of like
punch.
big guts. It's got the Soviet doctrine of like volume of fire, not accuracy, but like just like making your forces feel
like
powerful,
invincible. That's it. By just giving you like big sound, big guts of flame, very fast rate of fire. Anyway.
Now I couldn't see this panel coming, but I wonder if that's a 45 cal. Because if it's a 45 cal, maybe
it's 7.62.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, I
think the canopy is not worth shit.
I think they've definitely. I mean, they've established that it is a fast-moving vehicle. I mean, it is definitely. It's given up a lot to be fast. I mean, they've established time and time again, and what we've seen is that it's an exceptionally fast vehicle. Like, it's meant to get wherever it's going very, very quickly. it's the element of surprise that kind of helps it to overcome whatever forces it would hopefully be up against, and also to get out of there as quickly as it can. Because I mean, if we look at the toy, I mean, the toy itself, I mean, I think the blueprints don't say how fast it can go, but several different sources over the years have suggested very fast speeds. Because so before we say how fast the HiSS is, I watched I read a few things. The fastest tank in the world currently, I believe, goes 51 miles per hour, which is 1 mile faster than the average fastest speed, which is 50 miles per hour. And I believe that's on road. So 50 miles per hour is about the average of a fast air tank, or, while the HiSS apparently can go up to, I believe, 75 miles an hour. This thing
That's fast.
A range of 275 miles.
Mm-hmm.
That's like 500 kilometers. So that's a third of the way between Cape Town and Joburg. It's not too bad going.
Isn't it still outclassed by the bridge layer? Wasn't the bridge layer like ridiculously fast?
Not as fast as 75 miles. I mean, Paul, 75 miles per hour is like 110 Ks.
Ks, yeah. But
Yeah,
I remember
so
the bridge layer being like ridiculous, like 60 or something.
Yeah, but it's not quite like it's going to keep up with you on the highway. The HiSS tank.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's
absolutely
true.
insane. And here comes the interesting point. I mean, was Steven sharing the information from the Order of Battle, I believe?
Correct, yeah.
Where they credit the guns as being 30 millimeters, while the blueprints say 90 millimeters. And this information seems to flip-flop over the years. I believe the battle files from the Ultimate Source book say 30 millimeters, while the action card says 90 millimeters. I tried to find the Impel one. I don't think they tell you exactly what the information is. And also, even the GI Joe Monopoly game version of the HiSS is 30 mils, according to GIJoeFandom.com.
Now, I want to get your opinions on this, guys. Is it 30 or is it 90?
90.
That's a very wide gulf.
Yeah.
That is very, very big.
Firstly,
big difference.
This is not enough breach, even in toy form, for a 90 mil round.
I disagree.
For it to shoot rapidly, I don't think so. There's no way.
No, not rapid fire necessarily, but like break out your micrometer and see if the barrel of the HiSS. I mean, look, they're very short barrels if you're talking about a 90 millimeter gun. But hey, it's Mars, guys. This is Destru's.
Yeah, I get that, but I mean, let's use the Ninja Force Zartan scale of measurement here. 90 gets. That's how wide a 90 mil round is, guys, from his feet to his eye line. Okay, and I'm talking about a vintage Ninja Force Zartan. That's 90 mils. You're gonna push that out of a barrel.
Okay, so you're saying from his shoulder to his toes?
Yeah, well, from his eye line to his toes. Yeah. That's like.
That's the length.
I mean, I've seen
barrel.
those shells. My dad's got some of those in their home, but I mean, they were used for like long range, for infantry. I mean, for range, like big range weapons, cannons.
So you're
stuff.
thinking whoever designed this thing actually thought the HiSS was a lot bigger than what it was?
Or had no idea of how metric and imperial works?
No, I have a third option. They eschewed the dimensions of the toy in favor of making this thing capable of taking on a tank. For like main battle tank warfare, you want to be in the region of 120 millimeter gun, right? You want to be able to fire a big ass shell that is like an armored, like a sabot round that can penetrate armor, or a high explosive anti-tank round to make that thing go boom. Like, you want big shells to do the necessary damage to render a tank killed in one shot. Not an easy thing to do with sort of advancements in armor. So they wanted to make the HiSS a contender. And so they statted it up. Like, regardless of the size of the plastic, they statted it up. I'm in favor with calling it a 90mm cannon because, once again, coming back to this World of Tanks gameplay footage, I was like, yeah, you need that punch for this thing to contend with what it's going to encounter. You're also valid calling it 30mm because that's useful for taking out structures or like lightly armed vehicles, trucks, Hummers. Most of GI Joe's motor pool would be very quickly torn to pieces by a twin repeating 30mm.
So where do we think this discrepancy comes from? Is it like later people doing revisions to make it more realistic, or is it dual fed? Like, could you feed it 90 or 30?
I think it's perfectly valid that you've got HiSS tanks that are armed with a 90mm gun, and you've got HiSSs that are armed with 30mm gun. You mix it up so that you've got capabilities for both, because
Versus
there is no
tanks versus infantry.
there's no
puncher and a
coaxial
pegger.
gun. There's no coaxial gun on a HiSS. Whatever that is in that turret is what you're committed to. So you don't have machine guns or repeating cannons along with like a smoothbore, like slower gun.
So a column of HiSS would actually be, there would be different ones. So several
I
for.
think it's
That's
valid
kind
to
of
say
cool.
that.
That makes sense.
And that's
does
how
make
I've
sense.
played it in my head canon for, ever since I discovered this discrepancy, this sort of wide gulf of like, a 30mm
But
cannon, which, to be fair, is a pretty big gun. Like the 30mm is what's
Oh,
mounted
it's a big gun, dude.
in the
Those bullets
Rattler,
are dildos, bro.
in the
Full on.
A10,
Putting that
the
out there,
Bushmaster.
you should. I mean, an A10 packs 30 mils, 30mm rounds.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and
So
I mean,
that's
it's not like a
shredding.
small bullet. That's some girth in that thing, man. Like, I don't think it's gonna kill a tank, but it's gonna hurt the tank.
I like that
And like, can you imagine 4 of these on a Mobat, each firing 30mm, tear down a Mobat, and they can flank a Mobat quicker than a Mobat can maneuver?
Yeah.
It still makes them deadly, even if they're not using 90 mils. But I do like the sort of like, oh, you can switch them out 30 to 90s, and if you guys have got your own HiSS tanks, then sometimes you get different letters. Like I know the retro version doesn't; it's just got the 788, I believe. Whereas the modern era and I think the vintage gave you different numbers for your HiSS tank, different stick-on numbers.
They
So maybe
finally addressed it, but
Cool.
I mean, the 788 is what adorns, I'm going to say, 97% of all HiSSs out there. What is your feeling on like that being a unit marking? It's an attractive set of numbers, don't get me wrong, but like, would you have preferred to have your fleet of HiSSs all different?
I think I think nowadays with the guys who like to troop build these kind of things, I think it's cool to have different service numbers, to have 788, 768, whatever's. So you can have different platoons and like different members in your column have like different insignia. I also like the idea of maybe just like in your own mind, you could like distinguish your, like, let's call it your 6.8 series could be the guys who are packing the 90mm guns, and then your 7.8 series could be the guys who are packing the 30mm guns. I like that. It's just, yeah.
I like who you've
but
got
then
in
also it's a
gunner
lucky-
position, Paul.
Yeah, life finds a way. Got Jeff Goldblum. Or
Must
Dr.
drive faster. Must drive faster. Must drive faster.
Must drive faster. Guys, I love Jeff Goldblum. He's magic. I just got him in the series. Anyway,
Chaos.
yeah, very, very cool series. But just coming back to the HiSS tank and the numbering and all that, at least 788 is a lucky number.
It's a cool
They've-
number.
Yeah, and it's a cool number that rolls off well. And maybe if it wasn't 788, we wouldn't have had Hooded Cobra Commander's channel.
Who knows?
Can you,
Would have been a very different name for his channel.
Yeah, exactly. The number would have completely undone him. Like, I'm not going to start the channel. There's no like cool sounding number
do it.
associated with
Can't
the
do it.
Cobra.
No.
Well, in an alternative universe, there's Helmeted Cobra Commander 696.
Is there anything else on the blueprint specifically you guys would like to draw attention to?
Well, the one thing I would note, which I mean, obviously, I think is completely ridiculous, is that they claim it is a shell-proof tinted canopy. So shells, as we've just established,
It ain't tinted at all. It's perfectly clear. They didn't even bother to smoke that plastic.
You can't even take that thing to Cape Town, bro. It's like
it's not
tinted.
Everybody's gonna see you.
It's not shell proof because I mean we just established shells are like 100 mil shot here. So I think of the three like main things, I think the hiss it definitely hits the firepower. It's very strong firepower. Its battlefield mobility is very high. It's probably the fastest thing that you get out there. But protection wise, it's got very low protection. When it comes to talking about tanks and what defines modern tanks. So it's more like a tracked armored vehicle more than anything else, like very lightly armored. So I think calling it a tank is it's not accurate,
It's a bit of a misnomer. Yeah.
Yeah.
It is a bit of a misnomer.
Well, we've addressed it. Look, I think it's fantastic, and I do think that there are some fun things that we can pull out of the blueprints. I mean, firstly, how fun is it that they have a sticker to denote the tungsten headlights? That's really wicked cool. And something that the HasLab HiSS actually has finally given us actual battery operated headlights. Very cool. I do also like the fact that these locker boxes on the side, sort of the side
they're accessible. They're for troops.
You got to use your imagination. They've yet to build a HiSS that you can actually access those points. Even the HasLab, they're just aesthetic pieces and not actual.
Maybe they didn't know.
Practical locker boxes.
My money is on they didn't know.
No, they always look at the blueprints first.
Of course.
Crib their homework.
Yeah, of the HiSS too. You can get in the back.
Concessions were made. It was far more important to have the, Street Racer Cobra symbol projected on the ground in front of you than it was to give us like a cool locker box to put accessories in.
Now we're nitpicking.
Rob, you just got me thinking about the fact that, the canopy is so absolutely not tinted, but it is absolutely crystalline, beautiful, like glass. And not only is that fragile, like when you're encountering fire, but like on a battlefield, you're actively trying to mask anything that can glint in the sunlight, right? This thing will be blinding. It comes over the hill.
You will notice it coming miles away.
Yeah.
Yes, that's why
they put those like sort of slits onto like binoculars.
Yeah.
Everything in the field is kind of masked off.
Yeah, anything that glints will draw attention to it. That's also a big thing with tanks as well. You have to be able to hide your tank. I mean, the thing that will win you a fight is 9 times out of 10 is getting the drop on your enemy, because the minute you fire that shot or they see you, not the minute, but I mean, especially if you play in World of Tanks, if you can see your enemy, you're going to be able to take them out quicker than they can take you out. And if you're seen, you're dead. That's another big thing in tank warfare.
We'd be remiss
not racing around.
If we're
not
talking
that
about
we're veterans.
Yeah,
well,
exactly.
no, but I mean, if you play the
game players. But the very earliest video game appearance for the HiSS was in the Atari game.
Oh yes,
amazing. In which you can take a Mobat or a Vamp or a Sky Striker or a Dragonfly into sort of vehicle combat, and the resistance that you will encounter most frequently is the HiSS. Yeah, it's nice to see them scaling it with Mobats. Like the HiSS looks like its toy relative to the size of a Mobat on the screen, and the turrets are animated to turn, but I don't think they actually drive. Like the game wasn't sophisticated enough to make them move. They kind of fixed.
Oh, it didn't come with pedals.
You also see it in
like
a wide shot of the Cobra temple. There's a HiSS, a lone HiSS, just sort of idling outside the building.
Sitting.
Just fun to
waiting.
see these
And-
things in old school pixels.
And I didn't want to give this game any more attention than it actually deserves, but the worst appearance of the HiSS tank in a video game is in the most recent Micro Machines game, which I'll have you listeners all know is the only game in my life that I've returned to a shop.
Wow.
Yeah, because the game is absolute shit, and the HiSS tank itself, it's cute and it's fun and whatever, but it's just so embarrassing that it's there. Like, I just feel bad for it.
Is this a retro game?
Yeah.
This is Micro
No,
Machines Military.
PS4. PS4.
Wild.
It's actually a Micro Machines game on PS4, and it is crap.
Yes.
Do not play it. But yeah, there is a HiSS tank featured in that, and yeah, horrible.
Well,
Anyway,
one last
enough
thing,
about that.
Like I want to know is the HiSS tank does come with a tow hook at the back. Is there anything this thing can tow?
Everything.
Can it really? I mean, okay, you
The
can't see
as-
it on the picture here, but
There's it's a GI
Yeah.
Joe weapon, but I know they did a blue one and they did a Crimson Guard version of that machine gun, that anti-air gun.
The
Oh,
Whirlwind.
Wait a
Yes.
minute! I'm stupid. It came with it, didn't it? The Target exclusive one, the
The-
red one, came with the bloody red terrible.
Yeah, well,
tank.
Thea's exclusive, I think it is. But yeah.
Yeah,
it came with
back
that.
in '83, they were designing these tow hitches with the towable systems in mind. So yes,
Brilliant.
it is probably one of the best examples of a towing system. It's in the right height, the right position. It's a good one, very good one. It's very attractive when paired with the Cobra version of the MMS or the ASP. The ASP is a no-brainer. It does bug my OCD slightly that the ASP is not black. It's okay. Speaking of something picked out in blue when it should be another color, are you guys familiar with the blue version of the HiSS driver?
No, It
I
actually looks
am. I've seen it in
pretty
pictures.
decent.
He is actually a unique character called Ripit. Who,
Yes, that's right.
in his spare time from
Remember that.
driving hisses, he likes to play golf. Fun
You mean
fact.
like a frog, ribbit?
Sociopath.
Ribbit.
Ripit?
Oh,
Could be a
okay.
dreadnought.
Guys, I'm messing with
If I'm
you.
honest.
It's totally fine to play golf.
Yeah. Guys,
Is
at the
it
start of this
Ripit-
podcast, I think we were of
like-
the opinion that his is Cobra's sort of most visible icon of land warfare. Would you agree we've kind of borne out this theory?
Absolutely.
Oh,
I think
yeah.
there's nothing else on the ground that compares to the HiSS.
What even comes close?
Nothing.
The Maggot was brought in as a sort of a main battle tank replacement, but it quickly kind of got shuffled to the side, and the hisses were still being used in conjunction with them.
I think
The
the
Hiss,
only
the Hiss 2?
I think the only other vehicle that maybe is as iconic as a land vehicle, or is as iconic as the hisses as that is a land vehicle, is the ferret. Yeah,
But still,
my
that's
money. Because remember, I'm coming from a
Where you going with
cartoon
this
point
ball?
of view. No, but I said the
Okay.
ferret. I do mean the quad bike.
yeah. That's why I'm like,
Yes,
it's
okay.
a quad bike.
Sometimes the ferret, sometimes I'm like, is that the ferret? But in the cartoon, it's a vehicle that you see quite often. You know, like if it's not his tanks shooting stuff down, it's ferrets shooting stuff down or being driven around as land vehicles. It is kind of
It's associated
iconic
with
as a
it,
Cobra
but it's
vehicle.
not. But it's not
Yeah.
like specifically only to Cobra. You know, like
Yeah.
HiSS, nothing
No,
else.
that's
has
true.
this. Anyone
but it
can
does.
have a
But
quad
in
bike.
the Sunbow verse, it
still,
is very
get
much a
it.
Cobra thing.
You know, you
Yeah.
see it a lot, the
Yeah.
quads. And that's also something that's more easily acquirable for kids, I guess, in America. You know, like, hey, go on the weekend, go for all the quad biking in Texas.
All right, boys,
Yeah,
confession
why not?
time.
Ooh,
Who
We don't.
here used to take the turret off your tank or your hiss or your septic tank? In my case,
do
it's a
shots.
septic tank. Do shots
wait.
out of it, exactly. 9-year-old Steve, I was like finding the hardtack, pouring it in, and before it can drain out the holes in the bottom, because yes, there are like clip holes. You got to be quick. You got to chug
No,
that
I mean
whole
out of-
thing.
I mean, out of this part, dude, out of the cupola. Like, don't be weird. Don't drink it out of the tank, man. Like, drink it out of the cupola. Do doubles out of this bad boy.
Me and Steve were doing those shots wrong then. Actually,
Oh,
There was a time.
So much.
There was a time in
spillage.
my younger life. If I owned one of these, I'm pretty sure we would have found an excuse to do shots out of these cupolas. Cupolas.
But no, Paul, allow me to
Bro.
play the straight man to your jokes.
My
No,
jokes.
I used to always use it as a APC.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense because the turret comes out fairly easily, and there is a huge cavity in there that fits
With the seat,
figures.
it's got a sill. It's got like a, it's difficult to see, but it's in there.
unintentional. It's
Would
unintentional.
you say that's a hidden feature, Steve?
I wouldn't even go so far as to say it's a feature. It's a hack. If you're familiar with the construction of these things, you're like, there's a lot of unused space in there. I'm going to use it for equipment. I can use it for guys. As long as you don't put the turret back in, they can sit in there fairly comfortably. I think you could probably even push a guy to the forward section and put the turret in. I'm going to do this.
No, knowing
live.
me, I would have. I think I've tried that actually, and
I mean,
so
they've got a
admittedly,
token like feature on the HasLab. Like you can fit one guy in there. And I always
Yeah, on
find
the
that to be a little bit strange. Like I suppose it would be like a command character or something like a VIP. Oh, by the way, it fits. Yeah, I suppose a sort of an engineer, a member of the crew. But yeah, it's not elevating the HiSS into being an APC by getting one guy in
He
there.
can drive it too, by the way.
I feel like this is maybe a moot point on this episode. But
Yes, it does
but I'm
fit
glad-
at least one guy in there with the turret. I could fit a second, I'm pretty sure. Awesome.
Brilliant.
I'm glad Steve's got the septic tank on screen and with him in person right now because I want to ask him something. On the retro HiSS, and I actually can't remember right now if the modern era has it. It's got 3 points on it. So yeah, so when you like remove the cupola or whatever
Yes,
the hell.
the turret is keyed so that you can only slide it out in one orientation.
Yeah, so it's a lock and key. So this one has got 3 of those. But yeah, and the reason I'm thinking about this is because when we were looking at the blueprints only had 2 of those.
Yes, on the classic, they're 2 and they're kind of equidistant. Whereas the HiSS, the septic tank does something interesting and like makes them a kind of a random spacing. So you can only insert them in one orientation. Any other one, you're going to kind of be forcing those tabs, which the previous owner of my current septic tank did, and it was not pretty, man. It was like wedged. You couldn't turn it. He was like, there's something wrong with that. I'm like, yeah, I think I know what you did here, buddy. You jammed it.
So this actually bugs me. This bugs my OCD because
I know.
Oh, that is random.
you've got a line. If you draw a straight line between the 2 front like clips, you'll see that the gun doesn't sit in the same line as that.
Yeah, I
It's
did
very
see
irritating.
that.
Well,
Looking
then
at
you
it.
need a
It's
classic
very
HiSS, my friend, because the classic HiSS would have the notches just the two
Yeah,
back
exactly.
sections.
Yeah,
Or
I
is it
think
the
they
two
So
obviously-
front
maybe that's
sections?
also.
I
So
think
maybe
they
that also
obviously-
makes this episode useful to people who see these at a thrift store or something, and maybe are purposely looking for the vintage one, or looking for the vintage cupola. Guys, just beware that a vintage cupola will not fit in the retro HiSS.
Oh, what absolute
Wow,
hell! If
really
you've
like
got
this.
like the 2
Can you
parts and they
imagine?
can't marry, and you're like, what did I just buy, man? This won't work.
What did I do
wrong? Rob, you wanted to say something, man. I just caught you there with a bit of lag.
Did I? I was just gonna say the HiSS is an awesome vehicle. I love it so much. It's the best.
I love it so much.
10 out of 10.
10 out of 10,
I wanna-
5 out of 5.
Kiss on the lips.
Do any hot takes amongst us? Does anyone here regard the HiSS 2 more highly, more favorably?
Well,
I do.
Paul,
I
I
probably
do.
would. I think I do actually as well. Yes, this is like the classic. It's very straightforward. It's sleek. It's simple. But I think the HiSS 2 has more personality to it. You know,
Interesting.
the over-designed weird cannon thing that comes up. The fact
you
that
totally
can
said
pull out the
over-designed.
back. But I mean, it's cool. Over-designed in a cool way. You know.
Yeah. No, I agree with you.
The features
totally
for it
that.
are so much more toyetic and more fun, I think. Well, this is more, I don't know, it's more
Iconic.
I don't know, iconic, absolutely.
Use the word over-designed. Yes, the HiSS 2 one-ups the HiSS in every category except good taste.
Yes. It's
The HiSS OG 1983 is just sublime. Call it a tank, call it an armored fighting vehicle, call it whatever you want.
Whatever you want.
When you're pushing it around on your carpet, as I did 2 nights ago, what fun! Just I could steer
the devil's
tank
dustbuster.
I did what Roadblock was talking about in that issue. Like, I steered the tank and manipulated the turret with one hand, pushing it along the carpet while I was sort of...
Oh, you were God.
I know, right? Amazing. Just whizzing it around, opening fire like at right angles, like doing that typical like World of Tanks kind of driving around your target with the cannon sort of facing inwards into the circle and just pounding them with 90mm twin Diablo cannons. Ooh, what fun. I'm inspired to play with my HiSS. Just before recording this podcast, my son was pulling the toys off the shelf and like, yeah, we're going to get into it. I hope we've inspired you guys to get your toys down as well.
Do it. Get
yeah,
your
guys,
out.
the Devil's Dustbuster is an awesome vehicle. It's beautifully designed. And it's everything that Steven said, and I totally agree with him. Although I have nostalgic memories with the HiSS 2, and that is why I do prefer the HiSS 2 in a lot of ways for playtime and the adventures I had with it, and it did the square off against the Warthog. But there's a reason I own 2 of these guys. I own 2 HiSS tanks. One is a modern era, the other is the retro collection one.
Because they're smaller.
And they're smaller, and I own a septic tank. Why do I keep buying these damn things? And I would still love to one day get my hands on the modern era Arctic HiSS. Why? Because they're so cool. They are really, really cool.
And I think you all agree with us too.
Yeah.
On the topic of our how these things found their way to us, yes, I do have a classic HiSS in Cape Town, which I found in Joburg. But Gary V, thank you so much for this retro HiSS that you got me. Way back when COVID started out and I was stuck here without any toys, he was like, Jubs, I got you, buddy. Here's a HiSS, here's a Mobat, have fun. What a guy, what an absolute gent. Yes. And that, I think, is all I have to say about that. And check out Gary's podcast if you want more deep dives into GI Joe and Cobra tech. The Chaplain's Assistant's Motorpod does that. He reviews vehicles on the regular and gets very in-depth, perhaps more in-depth than us in terms of the technical details. Gary's got that mind, man. It's awesome to listen to. Get immersed in the
he's
details.
also very he's very mechanically minded. I mean, there's a reason it's called the Chaplain's Assistant's Motorpod. It's not just because of the cute nod to GI Joe, but the man.
Not just because it rolls off the tongue so easily. Thanks as always to our patrons. You guys are awesome.
Yeah.
Well done. You keep our HiSS tank fleet rolling.
Yeah. And also, actually, in more ways than one, because I think it's fair to say that every one of us has a HiSS tank that was contributed by Bergforce members to us.
Sure.
So thank you very much for that, guys. So that's awesome. And then I'm going to use this episode as an opportunity to mention this. Guys, you may notice a new look and feel. We are changing our podcast, our streaming provider, because our current streaming provider has decided that cocaine is the way forward and now has a huge cocaine bill and probably has a whole bunch of huge bosses trying to kill them. And so they need to make a lot of money very quickly. So the subscription for that has actually doubled, and it's ridiculous. And now we're changing providers. Just to let you guys know.
Tell everyone this, yes.
We need to tell people this. Yes, it's important. It is our civic duty as media professionals. Anyway, thank you for that little bit of red tape. So, yeah. So your contributions are welcome, but we won't waste them. So, yeah.
That's the point.
Life finds a way.
Cobra!